Welcome to episode 2 of Grayscale LA. Today I sit down with Pablo Leon, an author and artist from Guatemala, now based in LA, whose work moves between comics, animation, and deeply personal storytelling. Many people know Pablo for his work illustrating Miles Morales, but he's also an Eisner Award nominee for his original comic, The Journey, which tells the story of an unaccompanied child coming from Central America to the US. A story that hits especially hard right now as LA communities continue to feel the effects of ICE and immigration enforcement. Besides working with companies like Marvel and Disney, Pablo uses art as a way to preserve memory, to document stories that are often erased, oversimplified, or misunderstood, especially within the Latino diaspora. In this conversation, we talk about what it means to exist under a single label while carrying vastly different histories. We unpack why Latino stories don't always get the patience they deserve in mainstream media, and dive into his animated short film Remember Us, which qualified for consideration in the Best Animated Short Film category at the Academy Awards. This film explores the Salvadoran Civil War. As a Salvadoreño myself, this film really resonated deeply. It reflects a history and trauma that so many Salvadorans around the world carry, even generations later. This isn't just a conversation about art, it's about responsibility, remembering, and what it means to tell the truth, even when it lives in the gray. If you enjoy this conversation, remember to support by liking this video, dropping a comment, and subscribing to our channel. Being, in LA too, I find that a lot of people, because I'm Latino, assume that I'm Chicano, or they assume that I'm Mexican. And it's because mainstream media portrays us to be Mexican, especially in this region of the US, right? But there's a whole diaspora of different kinds of Latinos, Afro-Latinos, indigenous Latinos. And I heard when you spoke, I really love that some of your projects tackle the history of where we come from, some of our stories. Before we jump into all of that though, I wanted to get your take on what do you think the gray area is in living in the U.S. as a Latino, and how do you feel that we navigate through that?
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me the space, man. I appreciate it.
Of course.
It's like you said. Unfortunately, the media itself has created this bubble, this idea that we're all one, but as nice as it sounds that we are also united and as a community, well, we are our community, we also have differences of our cultures, differences in our countries, differences in the way like the way we cook, the way we do things, the way we and unfortunately also in the way that our diaspora started.
That's right.
So it is a little unfortunate, right, that it happens like that, and we are constantly having to tell these particular differences or point them out, and sometimes it does feel like a little obnoxious, but it's unfortunately necessary because our stories, they're not always the same. And I think starting with how like there are certain types of violences that happen in our countries, and that's how we ended up, a lot of
all
us
over
first,
the world.
all over the world. So some of them may be cyclical, some of them are very similar, but it's also not quite the same. So that's kind of where I feel that we need to kind of open up and talk about that stuff, because I think it's really nice that we can talk about the things that we enjoy, the things that we're very similar on, the coffee, the food, the landscapes. I mean, we in my country we have a ton of volcanoes, but we also talk about the things that kind of separate us and how we ended up here. The violence in Mexico that happened throughout the 90s and early 2000s is very different than what happened in Guatemala. Very different than happened in El Salvador. Honduras is, so it's we do have, I feel like some of us do have a responsibility to at least bring that up, not to be party poopers about this, but that's definitely where I see it, that we should talk about our differences as well, because that also makes us stronger, and also we are able to talk about our history.
That's right. I think something that you touched on right now that's interesting too is because Latinos, we all are united under one umbrella as Latinos, but there's so many differences, right? Because we both work in entertainment, I've noticed that there has been a struggle in keeping, when we do have a Latino breakthrough project, we're all excited, but it doesn't necessarily last. And maybe that's because as Latinos, we are so different that project might not speak to all kinds of Latinos. So I'll give you a good example. Gentified launched on Netflix. And there was a lot of Latinos, including myself, that were really excited about this show. But, after season 2 or something like that, it got canceled. And it's unfortunate. It's the reality of television and entertainment. Things don't always last.
Yeah.
But to me, I looked at that, I'm like, man, it took us a really long time to finally get a show, and then the plug gets pulled. And when I talk to different Latinos about it, different Latinos feel different. The Chicanos in LA, they loved it. They really rallied behind it. Salvadoreños, I think Centroamericanos really liked the show. They could relate to it. But then more on the Caribbean side, Puerto Ricanos, Dominicanos, they don't necessarily feel like they could relate to all aspects of like this specific Boyle Heights show, right? So to me, I'm like, how do we as Latinos create entertainment, and do we even need to, that can encompass all Latinos so that our projects have longer legs so they could last? What do you think on that? Especially because you work in a world where you have tackled something like Miles Morales. Miles Morales has more of a universal appeal. Yeah. But he's also not only Latino, he's half black, half Latino, right? He's Afro-Latino.
He appeals to a wide range of demographics. Also, he's Spider-Man.
He's Spider-Man, very universal. So, a lot of people love Spider-Man and superheroes in general.
I think that's something to consider as well, because I do think that, I grew up with Dragon Ball Z. That was kind of my introduction to a lot of media.
Right.
And
you're Dragon an 80s baby for sure.
I am. But Dragon Ball is very much it's not a Latino show.
No, it's not.
But if for some reason it just appeals to this crowd. There's something about it. There's always the jokes of Goku being a Latino dad. It's very much like he shows up a little bit and he bails. Vegeta being Vegeta being the racist uncle that.
Right.
But so all those things were really interesting, that they were not geared towards us, but it appealed to us, and I think that's definitely something to look into. How there's a lot of things that came towards us that we really connect to. They're not necessarily about us, and I think that's something that I see with a lot of shows, especially working in TV animation, working in TV in general. I think there is something where maybe sometimes we try a little too hard to connect to a demographic or a certain group, and it just sort of we leave everyone out, and it does kind of make it a little messy. So I do feel like sometimes it's just a matter of luck of what connects with us. Right. There is the I don't know if you know about it. There's a Chilean puppet music group. It's called 31 Minutes.
No, I'm not aware.
And it's massive right now. And they just did a Tiny Desk thing.
Wow, okay.
And, it's weird. It's from Chile. It's puppets. It's a musical. And it's kind of dumb, but it's also really great. And, that thing, just a lot of people have really just rallied behind that. So I think it can be a little tricky just to know what we're going to get into next, But on the other hand, I do understand, and I do agree the need to want to do something like Gentified. I really love the show called Primos.
Primos is great,
and unfortunately also the same fate, right?
Right.
Like one season and that was that. But I do think that those are also important because we do have this like first, second, third generation, Latinos, diaspora, and everyone that they're not gonna connect with all these things that, say something like I grew up in Latin America. I grew up in Guatemala. What I grew up with, somebody that grew up here is probably gonna be like, what is this? This is
Right.
weird, like. There's a show. There was a massive show over there called Knights of the Zodiac as well. When they tried to bring it here, it bombed, and they've tried to bring it here several times, and it keeps bombing. But I think it was just like a specific timing and a specific audience and a specifics of how we grew up. And so the things that we grew up with, not necessarily gonna appeal to the people that grew up here. So. And the things that they see in, kind of like an identified is, those are things that are very much to their culture, like the Chicano culture,
Right.
the Latino U.S. culture. So I do think those shows are important. They're just not allowed to grow. And that's the unfortunate nature of the business right now, is that if things are not an automatic hit, like it's gone.
Yeah.
And sometimes they just need like that, just like a little time to grow and to start having that appeal to not just us, then it starts growing to other people, because it's also important that other people see these like lives, these stories that from a community that's really like next to them. So.
That's a good way to put it. I feel like the patience to allow something to develop doesn't exist anymore. It has to be an instant hit, as you said, right? I want to jump into a little bit of your work, and it's funny because as I was preparing to speak to you, I listened to your podcast that you were doing, I think like 11 years ago.
Oof.
Knights of the
Light Table.
Knights of the Light Table. So I heard the last episode that you did, and I heard the very, very first one. I'm like, you know what? I want to hear what Pablo's mentality was at this time, right? Man, I have to say, even for you as an exercise, you should go back and listen to that, because you talk about, like, the episode starts off with you talking about you being in education and your career is really rough at that time. And
right,
and your friend that you do the podcast with is also, you guys are just kind of starting out, you're kind of finding yourselves. And then fast forward to today, I'm like, wow, Pablo's career, you have a very reputable career. You've done Miles Morales, you've won awards, you've been recognized by the Academy, like all these amazing things. And I'm like, what would that Pablo think fast forward 11 years to today?
I've thought about that. I have thought about that before, because I think he would be proud of all the sacrifice that ended up happening to make it here. But I always do think that I did start it a little later than a lot of people. I didn't go. A lot of times you start with, you go to high school and then you go to film or art school. And then you go into try to find yourself in the industry. I kind of went to high school and I didn't go directly to college. I was just sort of like, living life, I guess, but like also completely aimlessly. So it did take me a little bit to get into that. And there was a lot of, luckily, like my family, my mom especially, she wasn't like a hardcore, like, what are you doing with your life, get a job? But I think it was coming, eventually it was coming. But she was supportive enough where I was able to, like, I was working, but also like pursuing this. And once I was like full-time pursuing it, it was, a little manic about it. Making a podcast about it as well was really weird. But like, I think
it's therapeutic, right?
Yeah.
Kind of helps you organize your thoughts too.
Yeah. No, I think, I do look back and I think, oh man, I did make a lot of mistakes coming here through all of that, but I think they were all like worth it. And probably wouldn't. The only thing I would probably want to change is like starting out earlier. But I think I also give myself a little bit more of a break because I lived a life. I had time to grow, time to mess up and learn from that, get some life experience, and
Right.
then kind of like move. But yeah, no, I thank you for breaking down.
Of course. What was the last? Have you heard that episode
I've-
recently?
I follow the rule of Cuarón, the film director, the Mexican film director, where when he finishes a film, he calls it like an amicable divorce. Like they had a great time, they loved
Right.
each other, but then it's okay to, and then he never watches anything again. So I kind of follow that, a little bit of that, where sometimes, not with everything, but sometimes I make something, and if I spend so long on it, then I'm like, okay, I don't want to look at this ever again. I loved it, we had a great time, but I think I'm good now. We can coexist separately.
So you don't go back and look at past works?
Not always.
No.
Not usual. I think there's only specific things. I do look at I look at the Miles Morales book sometimes, because the first one at least.
Yeah.
Especially recently, because I did a short story that came out this year for another Spider anthology, and I was like kind of looking into like what worked, what I did back then. I made Miles Morales during right in the beginning of COVID.
Right.
That's when I started it.
Yeah, let's talk
And-
about that a little bit. I have them
Yeah.
here because I knew I was talking to you. I'm a huge Miles Morales Spider-Man
yeah.
fan. When we met at Comic-Con, my son, who's 5 months old, he was dressed as Miles Morales. He was baby Miles Morales.
Somebody gave me a doodle that they made for from the book.
Right.
And I've kept that. It was a little kid that just drew like a Spider-Man stick figure, and I was like, this is the best time of my life right now.
That's
Like,
amazing, man. So let's talk about this because Shockwaves was the first one.
Yes.
And then Stranger Tides was the follow-up, right?
Yeah.
Here, thumb through this, especially because I know you don't look through your work. I want to see you look through your work.
Okay.
Thumb through it.
Yeah.
Tell me about it. How does it make you feel looking back at that? I think for somebody from our generation, Spider-Man Hombre Araña for us was a big deal. Marvel Comics is a big deal, and for you to get to put your own stamp on such an
Yeah.
incredible legacy, and especially not just Peter Parker Spider-Man, but Miles Morales, the first, mainstream Latino Spider-Man.
yeah.
That was incredible.
No,
Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, I made a book. I made a short story called The Journey, this is a more serious one. And
Yes, yeah.
The Journey, and we can talk about that one.
We're gonna
later,
talk about
but
that too, yeah.
The Journey got Eisner nominated, and
Yes.
I think that opened a lot of doors when that happened. So, Scholastic and Marvel teamed up, and they were trying to make comics for children, the superhero comics specifically for children. If I think you might know this, but like, it's really hard to pick up a superhero book these days. You have to really you pick something up, and then there's a lot of references to a book or a story that came out in 2010, but who knows where to get it. So you have to go on this Reddit hole.
That's right.
To figure out all the continuity thing. And frankly, they're also not made for children. They're made for people that have been constantly reading. They're made for adults.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was kind of like, okay, their approach was, let's make a book, let's make superhero books for children. And they're contained. You have to pick up one book, and that's it. And that's kind of that was kind of their pitch to me on that. My pitch to them was like, let's, if this is for a middle grade age, 7, 8, and on, why don't we make it more fun? Make it like a storybook,
Right.
like a picture book, so you had these lineless, very extremely colorful panels. It's still all a panel-based book, but it's also, it feels like a picture book. Feels in that, around the same time, Spider-Verse had come out, so everyone was just kind of trying to figure out how to replicate that. So that was kind of my pitch on the art, and they went for it, and it was a lot of work because I hadn't tested it out myself. It was just more like, let's just do something a little different, and it kind of worked out. It was a lot of work because traditionally, you make the line art, you color things, and then you move on. The way I made this was I had a really squiggly sketch, and then we just went in with like building shapes, shape after shape after shape, and then kind of figuring the whole page out, the whole color situation in one page.
I'm actually hoping maybe as you thumb through it, if you could find one particular illustration and maybe share either a frustration or like a challenge, or even just like maybe it's your proudest one within this book. I know you have two, but maybe let's just stick to the first one.
Yeah. My favorite page is one of my favorite pages is actually, let me see if I can find it. It's this one. I don't know if show it here.
You can show this camera.
Yeah.
Right here.
So in this page, this is the one where there's a lot of action happening. One of the we created these characters with Justin Reynolds. I don't think we get any royalties from that. Marvel. And so we created these two like teenage characters that they have powers. One of them like teleports, and the other, I wasn't really ever clear on her powers, but she shoots like Hadoukens or something. And that's kind of where we were sort of like going with that. And
it's like a Street Fighter mix.
Yeah. And it's just a whole page of like just a lot of action. But I think by this point, so what happens with a comic book is you really get comfortable and you nail this out in the last 10 pages.
Okay.
So this is a 102, about 102 page, 110.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And really, that's where I felt like I was like, I nailed his, finally. It just took forever.
Took you to the end.
Yeah.
Right to the end. So is there something within the last 10 pages that you're like, okay, this is why the last 10 pages is the strongest because of this particular section?
Yeah. So this section has a lot of everything. That's the style. The style we're going very graphic, very like, the effects are just like in your face kind of thing.
Right.
And I think this is also where Spider-Man starts kind of moving, the way he moves. Like he's like, he's not a muscly guy. He's just like, especially Miles is in this book he's a kid. So
exactly
the way he moves, the way his body mechanics, and then also with some of the stylistic choices with the characters. Then we had a lot of like loose line. So everything started like kind of falling in place here. Like his expressions. That's kind of where like more towards the end. And then we did fix some things here and there, but like that was kind of where I felt that I started really really nailing it. But unfortunately, obviously that was like at the end.
So does that mean that because you felt like you nailed it towards the end, when the second edition came around, did you feel like you were already in your groove, you were already in your pocket, or did you have to kind of restart all over again?
So, frustrations with publishing are complicated because, sorry. This mural was also really nice. Like,
that's really cool. The Puerto Rican.
Whole, like, we have, like, kind of like that. We started with the idea of like what are the themes of graffiti that we see in New York, and also New York as a character as well. But like there were times where we did have alleyways, and it's like there's no alleyways in New York, but no one told us that.
Right. So, right.
No, the thing with the second one was that we did started. And I had a couple of good pages. I approached it differently than this because it was a lot of work for. My output was just kind of lagging, so
Right.
I kind of went back to like a hybrid of like a traditional approach, line color, but still trying to keep a lot of the aesthetics that we had here. So unfortunately, delays happened, and I also had a day job. I worked in animation, TV animation, and it was just sort of like. Also, at the time, I had just started working on my own book, Silence Voices.
Right.
So it was like, okay, we need to finish this, but I'm sort of, kind of lagging behind here, and then there was a lot of deadline issues. So if you see it, like the first 13 pages are all me. Then I drew a bunch of them afterwards, but somebody else colored it. And I think they did try to get as close to the color aesthetic as possible.
Right.
But you can see the differences. And then somewhere in there splits where you have like 3 artists just to like try to get that deadline. Unfortunately, certain like graphic novels have really tight deadlines.
Right.
So we just couldn't. Yeah.
And it also becomes a thing of now working with other people, maybe different styles, timelines,
Yeah.
right? So it's a different thing in the mix.
Yeah. And like I had a great time working in the first part of it. You see the end of the book, it's like a completely different style. It's really cool though, like that
Right.
guy really nailed it, but it was just sort of like, this doesn't look
Just
anything like the first part of the book.
Right.
And I think it's really funny though. I flipped through it, I'm like, man, like this is a different movie than when we started. But I'm
it
here
evolves.
for it.
It evolves.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me this, because especially from your perspective, I want to hear how it felt like, or how you feel now when someone is able to say, Pablo Leon, this guy is an illustrator who worked on Spider-Man, Miles Morales. How do you feel about that? Because for me, I feel like that's incredible.
Yeah. No, it's great. I love it. I did, like I said, this year we did another book. It wasn't Miles, so I ended up doing, it was an anthology. And I ended up doing Araña, which used to be Spider-Girl. Superhero times. They just constantly change names.
Right.
So Araña is another spider person that also lives in New York, and it was great. It was great being back to that world, to the superhero. I personally have like, I have sometimes mixed feelings about superheroes, but I do love Spider-Man, and I do love like the work that we did here, because this is something that this wasn't for. This is a lot of kids just like love this book still to this day, and I'm like, man, like I'm really proud of the work that we did. I think most people know me as the Spider-Man, the Miles Morales guy, and I that's no complaints there. I appreciate it. I got to draw this. This dude doing like, I drew all my friends into this book as well.
I love that.
So it was just sort of like, yeah, this works for me.
What's great is when I think of, especially, I'm sure your career, you've tackled so many projects that are not always talked about, but the projects that you're really known for, there happens to be a Latino element in all of them. Like, let's get into the journey, because I feel like the journey, like you said, that kind of kicked off and opened a lot of doors for you. But the journey is actually, it's an older project. When is it for? 2014?
Oh man! So it started.
When was it released?
2018. I think.
2018.
Yeah.
So it's 2018, and so yeah, that's a number of years ago. But it's relevant now more than ever. I feel like that.
Unfortunately, right?
Because of the current administration and just everything that's happening with all the ICE things that obviously everyone's been seeing in the news and on social media. You being the creator of that, tell me how you feel that project stands today. And like you said, unfortunately, it's relevant now, but it still is very relevant today. How do you feel about that?
So the journey started.
And I'm sorry, give people a little bit of context.
Yeah,
so the story is about a young girl from Guatemala who travels to the U.S. to be reunited with her family. So
Yes.
she's considered like a young alien, like a youth alien coming into the U.S., right?
Yeah, yeah. It was a time. So the journey is about migrant children,
That's right.
unaccompanied migrant children, basically. What was happening around there was I was working in Atlanta actually. I was working. That was kind of my first animation gig. But I was also kind of frustrated with what was going on around the world, but also like just frustrated with my career as well. I was sort of like I was working on things that I just didn't feel connect. Obviously, they were for paying bills, but it was also like I just didn't feel connected to that. So for a long time I wanted to make this really grand project that talked about conflict in Central America, and we can get into that later, right? Because that's kind of where the seed started. But like, I had a friend that she was working at an organization that helped migrants in Maryland, and she was like, there's a lot of like children or a lot of kids that like they kind of follow the same pattern of like they came here on their own, and this is like early 2000s when that was kind of unheard of at the time, and there was a little bit more I want to say there was like a little bit more humanity on the side of the U.S. border, the Department of Homeland Security, because I don't think they had encountered that before. They have no idea what to do with these kids at the time.
Right.
So they didn't do what they fast forward to 2035 or even the 2010s, like it was a mess. But like what was happening in the early 2000s was very different. So that's the period where this person came, and she's a woman now basically, but like she's a grown adult. But at the time that I was able to interview her, I would say that, and this is not to put this story down or anything. It's just that at the time that I made that, I'm an artist first. I'm not a journalist.
Right.
So I did my best to ask her questions and kind of like get her to tell me her story as best as I could. And at the time, that was okay. But looking at it now, I think it does lack a lot of like a little bit of nuance on how it's told, that I think that if you compare it to the newer stuff that I made, it's a little more subtle,
right?
Compared to the journey. The journey was like, here's all of this, read it all.
Read it on. It's a lot of serious information in your face, right?
Yes, and that was kind of also the way that the interview went too. Like I didn't ask. I feel like I asked sometimes the right question and sometimes not. So I was kind of like a learning experience in the moment where I was like, oh, okay, this is how I did it. And then as I follow up later with other projects, that was a different approach. Kind of learning.
Well, Remember Us, I love that. It's obviously Remember Us for me, being Salvadoreño, being born in El Salvador, and actually that movie, you did it such a great job. That it actually explains, for people who might not be watching, it's about who are watching it. It explains the Salvadorian Civil War, and why people like myself had to leave. Like I was born in El Salvador, but I was raised in Toronto, Canada. Yeah. But watching that obviously spoke to me very closely. I've had family, share these stories with me too. But what I loved about it, and hearing the contrast with the journey, is that you're talking about the journey from a place where you were like, the journalism component, I felt like I could have finessed better. And then you look at the film now, and the main person is a journalist. Yeah. So I look at that as like a conscious effort for you to move more into a stronger journalism perspective. Can you speak on that and like that decision to take that approach?
Yeah. With Remember Us, is about 3 stories of people that lived through the Salvadoran Civil War, kind of like what they lived through, their experience, and where they are today. Um, and when I say today in the context of when I wrote it in 2019 maybe, or
Right.
somewhere around those times. And yeah, initially Remember Us was part of this grander project, and it was about the thread that connected everything was this journalist, and it's this journalist that is kind of basically looking for just kind of like how people live through, and sort of he's kind of our POV in this entire thing. And I think that started. It changed a little bit as we moved forward. There was a different ending as well. And the piece is more hopeful, I would say, especially towards the end. But I think the obviously one of the most dangerous jobs in Latin America is being a journalist.
100%.
And
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wanted to give that just kind of like a little bit of a nod of like, here's somebody that's like putting their life on the line just to talk to you, just to tell, document and these stories and put them out there. And they do it out of this sense of, I don't know. I don't want to say heroism because I don't think it's heroism, but it's more like a sense of duty to the people.
Yeah, almost a sense of justice.
Just sense of justice, yeah, and not heroism. And so it is a little bit of that. That's pretty much what moved me into like having this character, and I did. He is. If you see the film, he's very much like in this. He's this quiet guy, and he only speaks in the beginning and he speaks at the end. But what he speaks is basically the way that there's a lot of journalists in Central America that, unfortunately, now they're in exile.
Mm-hmm.
That pretty much have, spoken about this, of like trying to document things and being stopped all the time, and now, Central America, we're kind of in a weird position, politically and kind of on everything. So that was kind of my intention with this one, is to like just kind of give them a nod of like I see it, I see what, and I appreciate everything that you've done, because this wouldn't exist without journalists.
Right.
So
that's a beautiful sentiment. I also want to say, I know you say you don't consider yourself a journalist, but I think that what you do is very journalistic. I think journalism at the core is you ask questions and you present your findings.
Mm-hmm.
And presenting your findings can be in any medium. This is journalism. You're using a vehicle of animation to present the information that you're finding. And of course, there's also subtleties that you're including from your own lived experience, but that's still journalism. So I just want to say that I know you're being humble, but I admire you, what you do, because these are stories that they're never in the mainstream. Nobody talks about the Salvadorian Civil War, or the Guatemala Civil War lasted even longer, right?
Yeah, 36 years.
12 years versus 36 years, right?
We, well, first of all, thank you for that. Something that I learned from journalists, though, was that, and this comes from, like, the experience that I got from doing research on Remember Us, but also on Silence Voices, the graphic novel that, this graphic novel talks about the Guatemalan-born.
Yes.
And, well, the research was fairly extensive, and there was, unfortunately, a point where it kind of collided, and I was working on both projects at the same time. And
I heard you speak on them. So they were supposed to be the same project at one point, right? And then they split into two.
Yes.
So, sorry, go on.
So, yeah, initially I pitched it as a history book. No, sorry, I pitched it as a graphic novel, but what
the feedback was that
it felt like a history book.
Right.
So it kind of got split a couple of ways, but doing the research phase, the research was a little hard because, it wasn't just me talking to people, interviewing their experiences. There was also the element of like going through several documents, several reports, going through a lot of documentaries. So just a lot of reading, just the worst atrocities committed. And when you start it, it's like you read something and say, "Oh, that's terrible," and then you keep reading it, and you multiply that by months and months. It's just, it does get to you. And what I've learned from journalists is that the way that they do it is they just talk about it. They just talk about it out loud. They talk with their peers. Maybe therapy. God forbid ruining your therapist's day like that. But and so that's kind of where I learned that they don't keep it inside. They speak it out. And I think that was a big problem that I had, was when I finished all these projects, I was so depressed. But I think it was because I kept it all in me, because I didn't want to I didn't want to talk about that with my partner or my family. Even though these are very much public documents, anyone could read them.
Right.
But it did make it a little hard at one point to sometimes I would have to stop everything, because I was I can't keep doing this. But that's something that I've learned from talking, having now especially because of Remember Us, talking to other journalists, being able to have access to them, to being and this is such a basic thing too, talking about it helps me heal better.
For sure. Yeah.
But it's just such a thing that it never really occurred to me to do. So, in that sense, again, journalists saved my life.
That's you know what? It's amazing because you keep referencing journalism, and then in turn, what it's caused you to do, from my perspective, is I look in and I'm like, he's become a journalist. You're presenting your findings, and I just find that fascinating, because I think the same way that you say, I wanted to do something to pay homage to the journalists because they're brave. They're putting their self on the line to tell these stories. I think you're doing the same thing. I mean, you're telling stories through your artistry and your craft about El Salvador, Guatemala, civil wars, things that have been forgotten and kind of pushed under the rug. You're using your platform to bring those stories back. And I think that's brave.
Oh,
I think that's really important for especially as a Latino, for us to not forget.
Yeah.
Because these traumas that we've all experienced, my parents, they, in very, very, sensitive ways, they've told me about their experiences. But one time my dad did tell me, he's like, I was walking down the streets and, there's garbage trucks passing by throwing bodies. After a night of war, somebody has to come clean up all the bodies from the war, right? So cars can continue doing, and just those, he said it to me as, this is what the situation was. But as a person just using your imagination, you understand that that's a trauma that he and my mother and all the Salvadoreños that were living at that time, Guatemaltecos living at that time, we lived through that. And at some point, I mean, I'm not sure if this is scientifically proven yet, but there has to be some kind of cellular trauma that continues through the generations. And so we've all kind of lived through that, right?
And then it's kept in silence.
And it's kept inside.
Yeah.
And for some reason, maybe this is specific to my family, but I know other Salvadoreños too. There is this culture of shh, just shh, don't, we don't need to shh.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunately universal within our both El Salvador and Guatemala, and probably all the cultures that have had armed conflicts. It feels that it's this culture of silence that you don't want to talk about it, you don't want to bring it up. What happened on a normal society. What would happen is, okay, we finished killing each other. Let's sit down and maybe talk about it, or find some kind of psychological or help.
And rehabilitation
Kind of
programs, mental health
anything.
programs, right? Things.
But anything that would help like us kind of like come to terms with everything that happened and then move forward. But that's not what happens. This is unfortunately in our very terrible reality is in just like in Salvador and in Guatemala, like things just move forward. There was just like, okay, we're done here, so let's move on with life. And a lot of people died, a lot of people disappeared. Where are they? No, obviously by this point we know they're dead. So, and then the trauma of displacement, the trauma of, I think we're all kind of desensitized about the way we see and or how violence is portrayed in film and TV and everything. But I think seeing a dead body riddled with bullet holes, or like you just described, of just somebody tossing bodies casually, it isn't like a normal thing, and it isn't also something that you can like you just go like, oh, okay, well, let's move on.
Yeah.
It is. I think there's a level of trauma that you get from that, and in our culture, what happened was the culture of silence, the culture of like, well, we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to steer things up. Why are you talking about this? What are you, a communist?
Right,
kind of like
right.
there's always an answer to all of wanting to just talk about it. So, and that was kind of what our parents or grandparents got. So obviously when they were able to leave and able to move forward, leave to another country or stay in the other place, get it, moving on, they don't want to talk about it. And because they want to move on with their life, they want their children, their family to have a better life and not worry about what happened back there. Right. So what ends up happening is, you end up with you grow up and you end up with a lot of questions like, why are we here? How did we end up here? What started this conflict? And it becomes a problem for the parent, for the grandparent who's like, they're just trying to, crush through life and not think about these events, these traumatic situations.
That's right.
And then when you start hammering with the
they're
questions,
trying to forget. Well, we're trying to get answers,
but then it bubbles up.
Yeah.
And then I think that's where we get these whole like kind of like the stereotypes of the grandparents that lash out of like PTSD,
right?
Which is, but it's it's a very real PTSD of especially of somebody like, let me not to like ramble on about this, but there's a story of when I was doing the interviews for Remember Us, there was the story of this man that unfortunately it didn't fit into the idea of what Remember Us was. Remember Us ended up focusing mostly on several topics, but one of them was like violence against women.
Right.
In the three stories, there's basically women that are the victims of this situation. But there was a story, and I really, really thought about bringing it in, but unfortunately, didn't fit in the team. But it was about this old man who he was part of like a fishing company, and the Salvadoran military just kind of like lured them out there and just shot all of them. And this man just like, it was like in a Rambo type of moment, he just like did his best to survive and just jumped out of the boat, swam all over the place. Like he stayed out in the sea for hours.
Wow.
And eventually he was able to...
The animalistic survival part just kicks in.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, that's...
And then he eventually made it back to land, grabbed his, he went home, grabbed all his stuff, and just like left. And then he ended up in the U.S. and migrated to the U.S. But like that, those types of stories are not something that he will be happily share. Right. I think this was kind of like a situation where he was at the end of his years, and he wanted to share that, but it's not something that, casually that we would just sit down and talk about that.
Of course.
So I, in that sense, that's kind of where that culture of silence comes from, because
Right.
it's like, why would you want to share that? But I would say that on the other side of that, it's like we need that, because that gives us, especially like the first and second generation kids, a better understanding of where they're from and their country, and understanding that we have a lot of great things, but we also had really bad things, and we kind of have to like come to terms with those things as well.
Yeah. Again, it's like such beautiful, tragic projects that you've created, but I think very necessary, you know? But at the same time, I want to end on a positive note, because your stories also tend to end on a positive note. So you'll cover things and not just dark drama.
Yeah. No,
right?
no.
There's also positive notes. I do want to ask you though, what you spoke a little bit about journalism again and how they feel compelled to tell these stories. What compels you to tell these stories? Because you're now going on 3 stories that touch on these kind of themes, right? The journey, Remember Us, and Silence Voices, right? They all have similar themes that are dark, about a repressed people in a certain sense, right? What compels you to tell these stories?
Oh man. So when I came to the US, like, that was sort of something that it felt that the conflict in Guatemala it had just ended. So in the 90s, and then, early 2000s, I came to the States, and it was like virtually no one knew about it. I mean, the people who knew about it were, other students that also had parents that, migrated from there. And it felt a little weird. I felt a little crazy, because I was like, well, we have a lot of great things in Guatemala. Like, I mentioned earlier, like the coffee. We have great coffee.
Yeah, Guatemala has great. I've been to
Yeah.
Guatemala once, and the coffee.
It's
Our
amazing,
coffee, you know
yeah.
what it is? It's the volcanoes and the soil from the volcano, and our countries makes the coffee beans.
And that's the other thing too. We have a ton of volcanoes that are always like. That's why we have a lot of earthquakes.
Right.
And then, dude, there's like between 21 and 23 indigenous languages, indigenous Mayan languages, and out of all of them, the one word that all have in common is ishim, which is corn. And that's fucking I don't know, can I curse?
Yeah, of course.
That's fucking beautiful,
That is beautiful.
And so we have all these really, we do have this rich indigenous culture. And then, same thing with El Salvador. Like, there's so many great things about, I would argue that, and this is like this hill that I always dig myself in, and this usually plays out better in the East Coast, because we have more Central Americans there. But I always say that Central American tamales are the best of all of them.
I fight every Mexicano on this, because they think their tamales are good. I'm like, wait.
Every time I say this in LA, everyone's always like, I don't know about this.
I agree 1,000%.
But like, and so we have all these great things, but we also had this armed conflict that, it killed 200,000 people, almost 200,000 people. It was a genocide. It was a Mayan genocide. It was, to this day, we're still feeling the effects of that, because all the effects of all that come from, xenophobia, racism against indigenous cultures, even though they're like 40% of the country's population. They're still seen as other, and it's always like, it's a weird, complicated situation. Well, El Salvador, he had like the Salvadoran War was the most heard from the area.
From Central America.
Yeah, but it's still like you barely hear it outside of, and it was so there was a lot of like bonding with people like that. That's unfortunately the only way I can say it, is that we bonded through our
Shared
conflict,
Yeah.
shared pain of conflict, and that's kind of, in some ways, that's kind of how Remember Us was born as a production, because the studio that ended up animated, this Colombian studio, Colombia has had a forever war. They've always had this conflict, and when I talked to them about this, it was sort of like that was the same thing. It was like a shared pain of conflict. So I think that's kind of where I am trying to go. Not to say that only share these terrible stories to make anyone feel bad, but it's more like look at our history and maybe learn from our history, because it's gonna happen and it will happen again, and maybe we're not gonna be able to stop it, but maybe you'll know what played out, and maybe you can do it better. And that's kind of my goal. I think, remembering that this happened so it doesn't happen again, it's a very easy thing to say, very hard to do, but we kind of need it. And when Remember Us came out in 2024, and we're kind of ramping down our festival circuit right now, but like when it came out, I think there was a lot of confusion that this was a critique to the current government. And it wasn't. It was more like, this is a piece of history. And if you think it connects or it feels similar to your current, country's government, maybe there's a problem there.
Right.
So that was kind of like that's kind of like my goal. My goal is just sort of like see that this happened, but also on a lower, deeper level, it's more like when you remember history, when you remember and you talk about these things, you also give dignity to people that have been lost, and that's probably the best thing that we can do for them at this point. So yeah.
It's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to end on a positive note. Tell me, being from Guatemala and Central America, tell me something that you think is a beauty that you think everyone should experience going to Guatemala or Central America, aside from the coffee and the tamales.
Right. I think like every country, I think we become sort of like a little bit gentrified with, especially with mass tourism and everything. But I still, and maybe this might be a little basic, but I still think that like Antigua Guatemala used to be the old capital of the country, and then it got moved because of earthquakes. But it's like this colonial area. It's a town. It's not a city, but it's a city. It's very much still like you have this like cobbled roads. I mean, it's a beautiful place, and it's quiet, it's peaceful, and you can wander around anywhere. You can get, a really good coffee, going back to it. You can walk around and just get little treats. You can go to a store and just see these like really nice ladies just making tortillas, and they just give you one with like lemon and salt, and it's just like, this is the best,
fresh, made by hand. Right?
this is the best thing anyone can ask for. And I think that it's the simple things for me. That's simple, and I feel and I have fully acknowledged that this place again does have its problems of both gentrification and displacement through tourism. So I am aware that those things have that, but I think as a place where you just go in, because I don't think tourism is bad. You can go in, experience life, experience that culture, and you don't have to make it about you, or you don't have to Like you can just experience it and then leave and have a great time, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of, for me, that place is what makes it like, it feels what home feels like for me. For some reason, I can't fully explain it because, you know, I am kind of like a bit of a displacement baby as well. As you know, I was born here, but I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Guatemala, but going to Guatemala nowadays, it does feel like, I do feel like a stranger over there sometimes. I do feel a little bit out of place. So, and I think that's always that the diaspora mindset, brain. It's just kind of like you're never from anywhere. But again, receiving a freshly made tortilla from a really nice lady that just made it with salt and lemon, it's like the best experience in my life. I don't know. It just makes you feel like I'm 6 again, and I think that was like probably the best time of probably the only good year of my life. Everything else went downhill from there, but.
Well, thank you for that, man. I'm gonna make sure to go back to Guatemala. I'm gonna make sure to get a freshly made tortilla by one of these nice women and have a little bit of limon on it.
They're just different, you know. I think tortillas in Central America, they're a little thicker and they're a little smaller, but yeah, thicker. So it's a little different. So you just have to like kind of come to terms that you can only probably have 2, and then you're gonna be like, I can't eat anymore. But you know, yeah, just different things. But yeah, experience it, go in there, experience it, and then get out, and we'll be good. Yeah.
I want to end on a note for myself selfishly, because I know you're familiar with the Salvadoreño culture as well. Please tell me where your favorite place to get pupusas is here in LA.
Oh man. So I hate to say this, that I don't have a place, but there is a lady.
Okay.
I live in the valley, and there's a lady that sets up every Friday. just sets up her stage, everything outside of her apartment place, and she just sells them on there, and those are my favorite.
We're going. I'm gonna go meet you for one.
Yeah,
for
man,
a couple pupusas out there.
Yeah, I don't know if she does it like. I'm sure she does it professionally somewhere else, but to me, those are. It's just, I guess, not to like. Yeah, it's the same. It's the same experience. It's of this little lady just like making this thing and then just giving it to you, and you're like, this is great. And you know, you can just eat it in the street, and yeah, this is in North Hollywood. I don't know, every Friday after 4, that's where she sets up.
Amazing. Thank you, man. I'm gonna join you for
Thanks a lot,
some pupusas there. Thank you, brother.